Canada and Mexico announced retaliatory tariffs against the US after President Trump announced he was bringing in 25% taxes on their imports to America. Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau called for restraint from the US over trade.
We've built the most successful economic, military, and security partnership the world has ever seen. As I've said before, if President Trump wants to usher in a new golden age for the United States, the better path is to partner with Canada, not to punish us.
Well, in today's Sunday Times, the paper's economic editor David Smith warns how Trump's tariff could wreck world trade as badly as COVID did. And David is with us now. Good morning.
Good morning.
So just explain to us the dangers of tariffs and not only Trump's move here, but obviously the retaliation from Mexico and from Canada.
Well, you've just heard it, I think, put rather well by Justin Trudeau, the response that Canada is going to make to this. And I think you were just talking on the programme about Brexit, and it reminds me of some of the debates that we had back then. And, Brexit has not been good for us economically, and I think it won't be good for either the trade war won't be good for either Canada, Mexico or America if it is allowed to continue. And the similarities are, you remember the famous mini parts that would cross the channel several times on their way into the finished car. Well, you have that with Canada and America and Mexico. These, Mexico contributes or exports about 40% of the car components used in the States. Canada, about an eighth of the car components used. A lot of food goes from Mexico to America. And these three countries are integrated. Now, if Trump is doing it to his closest trading partners, as he is to Canada and Mexico, heaven knows what he's got in store for the rest of the world and how the rest of the world will respond. And this takes us back to the spectre of the 1930s and a trade war which gave us the help to give us and prolong the Great Depression. So I think this is worrying territory. I mean, this is not something you would expect from an American president. Perhaps you would expect it from this one. And it's potentially very dangerous.
So just on very basic level, explain to us why it is so bad. It fuels inflation, it makes things more expensive?
Well, if you think about the benefits of world trade, free trade, they were set out, more than 200 years ago by a famous British economist, David Ricardo. And they allow countries to specialize in what they're most efficient in doing. And that means that costs are brought down. It means that there's competitive pressure. If everything is happening behind a tariff wall, behind a tax wall, even in America, which is a competitive economy, then inefficiency comes in. The direct effect of tariffs, putting taxes onto imports, is to push up prices. We know that. We know that happened in Trump's first term when he imposed tariffs mainly on China, and it slows economic growth. World trade is an engine of economic growth. The world economy drives economic growth in countries like ours. So even if we are not directly affected, we don't know whether Trump is going to impose tariffs on UK exports to America. We get caught up in this through the wider effects on the world economy. So it puts an enormous amount of grit in the wheels of the world economy, in the wheels of world trade. It slows things down. It makes individual countries. It reduces competition. It's generally bad on every measure you can think of.
To put ourselves for a moment, if we can, into the mind of Donald Trump, if that's possible, could this work as a way of making people make a deal with the US that they might not otherwise have done? So actually the tariffs in reality won't come to anything, but he'll be able to cut a deal that he wants.
I think that is the idea. I mean, you've set a challenge there, putting yourself in the mind of Donald Trump early on a Sunday morning. But I think it's I think he has two ambitions. One is that that Mexico and Canada will fall into line, but on the things that he expects them to fall into line over. I mean, as the Wall Street Journal, which is no enemy of the president, put it yesterday, the things he's complaining about. Drugs and people flowing from Mexico and Canada into America. Those things have been going on for decades. They can't be fixed in a matter of weeks. Maybe there'll be a program for doing so. Maybe if there is, then he will withdraw from this. I think the other thing he's hoping for is that the corporate world will, rather than being hit by tariffs, decide to relocate some activities within America. And there's talk of that, but this takes an enormous amount of time. Again, I mean, if you are a manufacturer, a global manufacturer, you can't suddenly start up production in America. You have to build the factory, you have to get the people, you have to decide what products you're going to make there. So again, nothing can be done very quickly there. So I think we expected him to use tariffs as a threat, but I think the reality of it and the fact that it's come in already in terms of Canada, Mexico, and China to a smaller extent, I wonder whether the smaller tariff on China, 10% so far, rather than the 60% that was threatened, may have something to do with Elon Musk whispering in Donald Trump's ear, because of course, about half the Teslas in the world are made in China.
Of course. David, really good to speak to you. Always good to get your analysis. Thank you so much. That is the Sunday Times economic editor, David Smith. And you can read more on his views on this in the Sunday Times today with your digital subscription.
Do you know, I'm reminded of learning at university about Immanuel Kant and his essay, which was called Perpetual Peace. And this, honestly, go with me on this. His idea was that trade would guarantee basically perpetual peace. And we had a big discussion about whether he was actually being sarcastic. The latest UK trade data shows that in the second quarter of 2024, the UK had a trade surplus of, and I'll keep it in pounds, £4.5 billion with the US in goods. In the second quarter of 2023, the UK had a trade in goods deficit with the US of £2.3 billion. So I think it shows, Paul, basically the data demonstrates that we might not be as susceptible to the anger of Trump at trade deficit as other countries might be. It kind of comes and goes a bit, but there in the second quarter of 2024, it was 4.5 billion trade surplus. And I just then wonder how Trump directs his anger, because that's what it is. If the EU is next, if the UK is kind of up for grabs, I wonder how this works. Is Lord Mandelson the trade tariff saviour that we need?
Well, he's been a trade commissioner in the EU, so he sort of like knows his trade, and we can act as a bridge. I think this is a thing. I think we've done nothing to antagonise the US, particularly. I mean, there's been some personal things from some of the Labour leadership and the like, and sending people over to campaign against him. And we know Donald Trump has relatively thin skin in that regard. But what he's done, he tends to sort of like do this shock and awe, where he wants something from Colombia. He started threatening them with punishment. Within 2 hours, they started taking the flights back. He wants the same with Canada and Mexico in terms of the border.
Yeah, but their fight back is they're going to reciprocate. You know, they're going to do 25% on the US, and particularly targeting Republican states as the other part of the Canada response.
No, absolutely they are, but they've also moved on the border. So I think it's Alberta, the premier in Alberta, has set aside £95 million to do some to strengthen the border there with Montana and the like. But actually, yes, but these are big countries that are fighting back. But we can act as a bridge, whereas the EU, I think, will probably fight back if the tariffs do come onto them as well.
Yeah.
We shouldn't count out to him, though. We shouldn't become the 51st state, but we can act as an honest broker.